Think of the people you interact with every day. Would you want to spend a day in a canoe with them? Hi, I'm Nathan Mercero, CEO of Planning Alternatives. We're a disruptive brand in the financial planning space with a point of view that true wealth has nothing to do with money. Growing up in a small town in Canada, I experienced examples of families with money and without. It started me on this journey of understanding wealth and the idea that spending a day in a canoe with someone could be one of the best investments you could make. Join me as I sit down with leaders, entrepreneurs, creatives, rule breakers, and friends to discover their perspective of true wealth. And maybe you'll start to shift yours. Well, I'm very excited today to be joined by Dr. Kathryn Clark. Kathy, you and I have known each other for a number of years. You have a resume that is so extensive with all the research and accomplishments that you've been focusing on. I'll read a few points from your bio. You're currently an Adjunct Associate Research Scientist in the Department of Aerospace Engineering at the University of Michigan, and retired from the Department of Movement Science in the School of Kinesiology. You are the former International Space Station Senior Scientist, where you strove to coordinate the scientists from 16 contributing countries, make the engineers who were building the ISS understand the needs of the science community. You later served as a chief scientist for human spaceflight. And while at NASA, you included giving a lecture from the North Pole, addressing the United Nations in Vienna and landing an F-18 on an aircraft carrier. So it seems like your life has been pretty boring, and and I love your fascination with space. We're going to talk today about just some of the things that you've experienced in your career and also what you're working on now. But welcome to Day in a Canoe. Excited that you're here. What are some highlights as you think about your career that stand out at you at this stage?
Oh, my. Well, I mean, there's very little that's more fun than watching a space shuttle launch, and I had to do that for a living. We had to go down and my job was to host Hollywood folks, so, there was that horrible task. They were so fun, and so, it's such a big, powerful machine, and it's really fun to watch. I've never seen an actual launch of the new rockets like Elon's rockets. To me, they look a little bit underwhelming because you don't have quite so much, the view of it, of all the, smoke and fire coming out, but it's unfair because 'cause I've not seen it live, and I probably would enjoy it, live. So, the other 2 things that I've done that are just, I mean, beyond, well, 3, unique, right, was to, land the F-18 on an aircraft carrier. That is a very, very rare thing. It came about when I was giving a talk to the Navy. They have an annual bash. They call it the birthday ball or whatever they call it. Everybody's all dressed up. They're very pretty. And so I went and talked about, NASA and the Navy working together. And the last thing I said in that talk was that I would really love to get one cat and one trap in something facing forward, in an aircraft carrier. And after my talk, 6 admirals came up to me individually and said, "Yes, ma'am, we can make that happen." And then just to top that off, I had to go through some training to do that, which in many ways was more fun than the trip itself. Um, and when I came back from the F-18 ride, someone asked me if I wanted to jump on board the KC-135, which is the NASA Vomit Comet. I tell my students it's named after me. It's my initials and either my weight or my IQ, and I don't care which way you go with that. But so it goes from, 50,000 feet to 40,000 feet to 30,000 feet up and down, right? So it's called the Vomit Comet for a reason. But the guy said, "I don't know if you have time to get the medical before you do this, and you have to have this medical." And I went, "Oh, I just had that medical for my F-18 ride." So within 2 weeks of each other, I got to do both of those things. And that's about, talking about having too much fun. That is a real treat.
That sounds amazing. Yeah, take us back to when you started before your career at early age. Do you had curiosity about space? Like, how did all this percolate?
Well, there were 2 things that made a difference. The kind of overall thing is that my dad was a major space nut. So we were involved. We saw everything. We heard about everything. In fact, Apollo 11 launched on my 11th birthday. Tell you how old I am. and then landed a couple days later. So we stayed up and remember, I don't know if you remember, you're probably not old enough, that when it landed, um, the idea had been for NASA to have the 2 astronauts go to sleep. Well, they had just been through the most stressful thing ever in their entire lives. They were not going to sleep. And so they begged the mission control to let them take the walk immediately, which they did. And so for us watching on the TV, it was like 11:30 at night when they did that walk. And my parents went, "Stay up. This is the biggest thing you're ever gonna see in your entire life." So I had that level of, excitement through my parents, particularly my dad. But in addition to that, in the middle of all of this, I was down at the neighbor's house, playing. I was about 10, and, I didn't know my neighbor was politically connected. This is in Ohio. I grew up in Ohio, sorry. Um, so John Glenn
But
walked in the
you
door.
bleed maize and blue now. Is
I
that
do bleed Mason Blue, so it's okay. But John Glenn walked in the door. Um, and I knew who he was. My friend did not, but clearly he was with the father, and that was when he was doing the research before deciding to run for the Senate. So I'm up, fell over. I was so excited to talk to him. So I got an autograph. He autographed my sweatshirt, which I still have, and my mom embroidered over the autograph, so it's still there. The sweatshirt doesn't fit anymore, just saying. And then I had a picture taken with him, and it was one of those little old-fashioned Polaroids where a larger picture comes out, and then it's attached, and there's this, like, little tiny one, it's like your wallet size, which I still have. And one of the first interviews that I did at NASA was with Miles O'Brien and John Glenn, and I pulled that picture out. Well, I thought Miles O'Brien was gonna fall off his chair, he was laughing so hard. John was not so happy. So so but meeting John and having that experience just changed everything. I mean, that really was the tipping point at that point, was to have seen somebody who'd been there and done that.
amazing? And what was your pathway to NASA?
Very circuitous. So, I was a kines major. I was an exercise physiologist, which had been suggested to me by, my chemistry professor in college, because I also lettered in I think I have 9 letters from college. So I was a big sports person, pretty successful. And so when I went up and I was working in the kines program, um, that I then graduated with that, and I did a postdoc in physical medicine rehab, and the woman I was working with was married to the professor down the hall. So they shared a couple of lab spaces and stuff. He got into the astronaut corps while I was working in the lab. And so we were all excited for him. And I, told Dan, I said, well, I've always wanted to do this, but my eyesight isn't very good. I have pretty wimpy eyesight. And Dan said, you really ought to check that, because they change those rules all the time. So I went back and checked, and indeed my eyesight was good enough. So I started to apply. So you apply every couple of years, and I just became known as the person who wants to be an astronaut. And that led me to getting a postdoc in what is now cell and developmental biology. And it was during that someone threw a grant application on my desk to fly experiments on the space shuttle. Now, I wouldn't get to go with them, damn it. But, I could design an experiment. Here's the parameters, design it. So I did, and I got that experiment. It turned out I was, like, by 15 years or so, the youngest experimenter on the team. And it turned out it was great. There were about 10 or 15 researchers from all over the world, and we flew pregnant rats in space. And then we were studying development, all different aspects of development. And so we divided the parts. So it was a really big production to do all of this and work with this team. And I still keep in touch with some of the members of that team, because it was really fun. And so I ended up getting to fly in second set of experiments on the shuttle, because somebody else who had been kind of carrying on what I did ended up going into private, industry, and you can't work for NASA if you're in private industry. At least you couldn't at that time. And so I did that, and then my name got known, and I was invited to come and apply for the job of the space station senior scientist, which was just a trip in and of itself. I think I interviewed like 7 times. And in between, I wouldn't hear anything for the longest time. And I think, well, hey, I got to see NASA headquarters. I guess it's okay if I didn't get it. And then they'd call me and they'd say, can you interview at Johnson Space Center tomorrow? I'm like, do you think I don't have a life?
Right.
But of course, the answer was yes. And finally, I asked somebody at one of the interviews, one of the secretaries, I said, how many other people are competing for this job? And she said, oh, we haven't made flight arrangements for anybody but you for the last 3 interviews. You're in. So
Yeah, good feedback. What would surprise people to learn about space shuttles or space stations to the outsider looking in who's not familiar with the industry? What are some things that might surprise people?
well, I think one of them is their shuttle in particular, how small it is, although John Glenn would say wrong-o because his capsule was a whole lot smaller. Um, the other thing is, because of marketing, people had this idea that the astronauts eat, like styrofoam ice cream and dry this and that. No, they don't. The astronauts have a really, really terrific diet. In fact, it's so good, and everything that the astronauts have are color coded. So if I'm purple, say, all right, my there are stickers on all of my clothing that are purple that identify as me. All my food identifies as me. If I'm going to do an EVA, my long underwear is purple, right? Like all of that kind of stuff. And so when astronauts, after they've been up for a little while, they start trading those dots around. So I had a friend who went up in the shuttle, and he had to hide, I think, in his sleeping bag, a packet of M&Ms so that he could give me a packet of flown M&Ms because they would never have made it through the mission. They tend to eat pretty strong food, so either really spicy or pretty concentrated lemonade, because you tend to lose your sense of taste in space. It's like having a bad cold. And for the same reason, you get fluid in your head, so in your nose, and that's where your sense of taste comes from. And so when a cold, it's because you have an infection there, but in space, it's because all the fluids have floated up. Um, we have a bunch of mechanisms on Earth that push fluid up. Otherwise, you would have really big, floppy feet, right? And no blood in your head. Um, those systems don't turn off when you go to space, but you don't have the gravity pulling it back down, so it really pushes up. You end up looking very different. They're wonderful images if you ever see them online of the astronaut like before flight and then the day after, and the really round faces. And the male astronauts used to complain, right? It feels real. Oh, I just feel so puffy, and the women astronauts are like, oh, once a month, get over it, Jeez, right? But it's a little bit like that kind of feeling, and then a little bit clogged. So like spicy shrimp is one of the favorite um, foods in the entire of the entire Corps.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So you've had incredible experiences in your career. What's your perspective about the future of space travel with what's going on in the world now? Just a number of it's a pretty congested area in space as satellites show up and different countries are involved, and then Elon Musk's vision of inhabiting Mars. What's your perspective on all this?
Yeah, well, I certainly think our chances of getting to Mars, maybe in my lifetime, got a whole lot better when Elon got interested in it because NASA was never going to move that fast. They just aren't. Government agencies just don't. Elon had a rocket blow up. I don't know how far above the launch pad it was. They had gotten the data they wanted, so it was a little bit above the pad. But when it blew up, it completely trashed the pad, right? Because there were all these things in there. It would have taken NASA 6 months to clean that. It took Elon's group a week. And so that kind of stuff is, and so he really is pushing for that. Relative to the crowd in the sky, it's not as crowded as you think. And the reason for that is it's a really big space. Now, having said that, it still is crowded enough to cause people's heart rates to go up, right? Because when it's since most things are going the same way because they follow the Earth, right? They're essentially getting pulled along by the vortices of the Earth moving. So if you get hit, you're probably okay, like as long as it's not moving too fast, right? So it's the differential that'll get you. if an astronaut got hit by something as small as a pencil eraser that was going the other direction, so coming at him with that kind of force, it would cut him in half. So those forces are real, but most of the time you're not in that. And again, NASA tracks a lot of the pieces. They have to be like roughly the size of my fist. It actually measure my fist, but something in that ballpark. They track all of those. When I was there, they had 6,000 pieces up there. But it's a enormous space, right? Because it's not so the space station's at around 200 miles up. The big satellites that we have are like 25,000 miles up. Like, I mean, so there's a huge differential in a lot of these things, right? And so the space is much larger than we give it credit for. Um, and on the space shuttle, they used to turn it so that the astronaut was essentially inside the bay with the shuttle itself being the front blocking, so they couldn't get hit by anything coming the other way. On the space station, you can't do that. And their entire theory of helping the EVA astronauts is big sky, little astronauts. The chances are kind of slim, but it would be bad. Now, having said that, I did find out from the same friend of mine who got me the M&Ms, that the EVA suits that they were using when he was building the space station could take a hole the size of a quarter and maintain pressure long enough to get back in. So you don't get hit by this little thing and then just explode like with this little hole, like if he were to tear it on something. If he had help and got in, they always spacewalk in twos, had help and could get in right away and begin to depressurize, you'd probably save his life, maybe. But it would be a tough moment. So
You've had a shift in focus in that you've written children's books about space. What inspired that?
well, so the real inspiration that started all this was my niece and two nephews. I have one niece, two nephews, and they were pretty little at the time. So when I first started writing the idea, it was kind of to crack them up, right? In space was I was still at NASA, right? When I was writing those things. And then when I retired, I decided I wanted to go back and do that again, but do it a little more seriously. And I started working with a group of people, and they said, "Look, with your background, you could take these books, and they can still be funny, they can still be for kids, but you can teach real science." And so that's what we've decided to do. And so, as you know, it's going to be a series of 10. The author name is Auntie KC, um, because I'm the aunt to my nephews and niece. And the main character, whose name is Skylar, is actually my nephew, who is now 17. So he doesn't look like that anymore, like in the books. But so I write those. So there's going to be 10 of them, and it's going to be that this is essentially Calvin and Hobbes meets NASA. Right? It's a little boy with this amazing imagination, and his imagination reaches to space. And so there may be aliens involved. Just saying.
Mm.
Right, yes.
Wow.
And his sidekick, instead of being Hobbes, is actually an astro bear. It's a stuffed animal who is an astronaut, right? So he went to astronaut school. So like like Calvin, like Hobbes in that cartoon, the little character has all the answers, which worked out really nicely. So we can ask a question about space, and the little bear will go, "Oh, well, I know that," right? And so that's been really helpful. And so there are questions and clues for the kids to follow and figure out, and then adventures. And then, of course, there's total silliness because they're 6 years old, right? It's written for little kids.
And what's the title of your recent publication?
Well, the series is called Skylar's Space Adventures. The original one was An Unexpected Encounter, and the most recent one was This Away or That Away. And then the one that is almost done, probably come out in July, is called What's That Noise?
Yeah.
So, and I don't tell ahead of time what planet they're going to, and they're not doing them in order because at the end of the first book, they got clues as to where they were supposed to go for the second book. But I wanted the kids to have time to think about that and think about what that meant and do some research. And then at the beginning of the book, they go through the process of figuring it out themselves. So it's kind of fun.
We talk about what is fulfilling in life. We call it true wealth. What's the purpose of the money? What's important? What does true wealth mean to you at this life stage? What is your true wealth?
Um, It's a great term, by the way, because it really does kind of answer the why for bothering to A, make money, and B, go to the effort of trying to save it and have it in later life. For me, the true wealth is having the freedom to do this. I don't make very much money doing these books. Maybe someday I will, but I don't really care because I don't need to. As you know, I used to be a pilot, and this costs about the same as flying, and it's a lot less dangerous. So my husband's way happier with me being a book author. My real passion that I've discovered, I've always liked talking to groups. I really enjoyed, for instance, speaking to the United Nations. I enjoyed speaking to Congress. I enjoyed talking to school groups. And so, but I have discovered in this light, reading my books directly to students, little kids to older kids, is just so much fun. And the books take about 6 minutes to read because they're short. And then I just stand up and I will answer any questions the kids ask. And, little kids often ask much better questions than Congress. But they're also just entertaining, right? I mean, they're so much fun and they're so excited. And so I would be okay if I could do, 3, 4 talks a month to schools, sold some books while I was there, get kids to read the books. What I'm really trying to do is recruit the next generation, right? Scientists, physicists, engineers, astronauts, and you do that by getting them to think that science is fun, not scary. And it's fun so there's a wonderful scene in the book that hasn't come out yet where one of the characters, they're talking about, they're doing some experiments and he sneezes. And when you sneeze in space, you actually shoot yourself across the spaceship. For every action, there's equal and opposite reaction. Well, your snot is one side and you're the other, right? And so then, then the kids have kind of a fun, sort of fun making fun of him for that, right? And so it's, you have to have some occasional snot jokes if you're talking to 5, 6, 7-year-olds, right? But behind that, you realize that there's a physical law of physics that goes with that dictates what happens in space that you can see. And so that's one of the real fun parts of this is the kids actually pick that up. It's amazing to me how well they do.
It's fantastic. We'll drop the contact to you in the book in our show notes. Kathy, I want to thank you for taking the time to be in the canoe today. It's always a pleasure hanging out, and want to wish you great success with your book initiatives and all that life has to offer.
Thanks for having me. This was really terrific. This is really fun. It's a very different side of both of us, right, than what we normally say when we're working. So this is great. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
My pleasure. We'll see you soon.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review. To discover what wealth means to you, please take our assessment at planningalt.com.